The phone rang just as I was stacking the last breakfast plate. I dried my hands on my apron and lifted the receiver. My younger son, Micah, a co-pilot with a steady voice that usually carried joy, sounded different today. "Mom," he whispered, "something strange is happening. Sabrina just boarded my flight to Paris. I'm holding her passport in my hand." I froze. Upstairs, I could still hear water rushing in the shower. Then, as if to mock me, Sabrina's voice floated down the stairs, cheerful and ordinary. "I'll be quick, Mom." I pressed the receiver tight, my heart pounding. "Micah, she's here. I heard her. She's upstairs." There was a pause on the line long enough that I could hear his breathing. Then he spoke again, lower, firmer. "Mom, I'm looking at her right now, seat 2A, talking close with a well-dressed man." At that moment, the bathroom door creaked open behind me. Footsteps. A voice, "Glad you're home." My name is Ruth Calder, and that was the morning I began a notebook I would call my ledger of truth. If you've ever felt torn between what your eyes see and what your heart fears, stay with me. This was the day I learned that sometimes family life can split in two. My name is Ruth Calder, and I have lived in Asheville, North Carolina, for more than 3 decades. I am 66 years old, a widow for 10, and for most of that time, my home has been the anchor for my family. My older son, Grant, is a thoughtful architect who spends long hours at his drafting table, surrounded by rolls of blueprints and half-empty mugs of coffee. His wife, Sabrina, came into our lives with a polished smile and quick hands in the kitchen. Their son, Theo, is 7 years old, full of boundless energy and endless questions that light up even the most ordinary afternoons. My younger son, Micah, is a co-pilot, always in motion, always chasing the horizon. Each time he calls between flights, his voice fills the house with pride and warmth. I have always believed that my husband, Mark, who passed away a decade ago, would have been proud of the family we built together. And until recently, I believed Sabrina was the missing piece, the daughter I never had. She was tidy, industrious, always humming when she cooked, and she had a way of soothing Theo that made me grateful she had chosen Grant. But my husband once told me, "When your mind feels noisy, Ruth, write down what's true." His words would come back to guide me when life in this quiet house began to fracture. Micah's voice didn't waver often, but that morning it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. He explained that just before boarding, he'd run back toward the gate to grab some misplaced paperwork. There, on the floor near the jetway, he spotted a passport. He bent to pick it up, planning to hand it to the desk agent. But when he opened it, his breath caught. The picture was Sabrina's, clear as day. The name, the birth date, everything matched. I tried to laugh it off. "Honey, it must be a mistake. Maybe a traveler with a similar look. Sabrina is upstairs right now." Silence stretched on the line. Then he whispered, "Mom, I just checked the cabin myself. She's in seat 2A. I know her walk, her hair, the way she crosses her legs. And she wasn't alone. There's a man with her polished suit, cufflinks glinting in the light. They were leaning in close like a couple." My pulse raced. I looked toward the staircase, where steam still drifted from the bathroom door. It felt as if my home and that airplane were existing in 2 separate truths at once. Micah's last words before the announcement crackled overhead chilled me. "I swear to you, Mom," she smiled at me, then turned away as if she didn't know me. In the days that followed, I began noticing small contradictions that refused to leave my mind. At first, I brushed them off as nothing more than quirks, but once Micah's call lodged itself inside me, every detail seemed sharper. One morning, I watched Sabrina jot down a grocery list neatly with her right hand, each letter straight and precise. The very next day, she scrawled a quick note for Theo's lunchbox using her left hand, messy and slanted. When I asked about it, she laughed lightly. "Just practicing, Mom. Keeps the brain sharp." I smiled back, but a knot had already tightened in my stomach. Her mood shifted just as strangely. One evening she sang a lullaby, her voice soft, coaxing Theo to sleep. The next night, that same little boy spilled a glass of water at the dinner table, and she snapped at him sharply, calling him careless. The whiplash in tone left me staring at her, wondering which version was the real one. Even her clothing became part of the puzzle. She left the house in a white blouse, basket swinging in her right hand. Hours later, she returned in navy, the basket dangling from her left. When I asked why she had changed, she shrugged. "Spilled something on it." Then there were the tiny gestures, how she stirred soup counterclockwise when I had always seen her stir clockwise, how she opened the wrong cabinet for the salt, as though she had never memorized the kitchen. My husband's old saying echoed louder each day: when behavior disagrees with biography, write it down. And so, reluctantly, I began. It wasn't just me. Soon, neighbors and friends began to notice the same strangeness I had been scribbling down in my notebook. One afternoon, Mrs. Whitcomb stopped by to return a dish. She smiled politely but tilted her head. "Ruth, isn't your daughter-in-law right-handed? Yesterday she gave me this plate with her left." I nearly asked if she'd hurt her wrist. I forced a chuckle, but inside her words pressed down like another stone on the pile. At the bakery, Mr. Paddle shared his own impression. "Strange thing," he said, handing me Theo's favorite rolls. "Last week she praised my cardamom buns and laughed like we'd known each other for years. But this morning she barely spoke, didn't even look up from her wallet. Paid exact change, left without a word." And then, most painfully, came Theo's quiet observation. We were coloring together when he set down his crayon and whispered, "Grandma, I like nice voice mom better than storm voice mom." I pulled him into my arms, kissing his hair as my throat tightened. Out of the mouths of children came the truth we adults sometimes refuse to admit. There wasn't just a shift in Sabrina's mood. There were two different versions of her moving through our lives, and my grandson already felt the fracture. That night, I pulled an old spiral notebook from the drawer where I kept spare envelopes and stamps. If my mind was going to keep circling, I needed something solid. I titled the first page Ledger of Truth. I began with the simplest details: dates, times, actions. Nothing fancy, just facts. 3:10 p.m. Sabrina leaves for market with red basket. Returns 5:55 p.m. with blue basket. Explanation: friend lent it. Next line: bedtime. Yesterday she sang lullaby. Tonight she refused and left Theo crying. It felt odd at first, recording my own daughter-in-law like a detective. But once the ink dried, I noticed something. My shoulders relaxed. Paper was neutral. Paper wouldn't argue back. Each day the notebook grew. School form signed left-handed. White blouse in morning, navy blouse at return. Tone of voice: affectionate Monday, cold Tuesday. As I filled each line, I thought of my husband's words: "When your head spins, write what's true." And so I wrote. For anyone listening now, know this: if life ever makes you feel like you're imagining things, put pen to paper. A simple line with a date and verb: June 12, 5:40 p.m., raised her voice at dinner, can cut through fog. It may not give you peace immediately, but it will give you ground to stand on. For weeks I filled my ledger, convincing myself that one more note would make sense of it all. But the contradictions only grew. I needed more than ink. I needed clarity. I called my oldest friend, Carol. We had raised our boys together, shared casseroles, laughter, and grief. Over coffee, I handed her the notebook. She flipped through page after page, her brows drawing close. Finally, she said, "Ruth, it's not in your head. If you want the truth, you may have to follow her." The very idea chilled me. Following my own daughter-in-law. But Carol's words stuck: not to accuse. To protect Grant and Theo. So one Saturday, when Grant was at the office and Theo had a school activity, I saw my chance. Sabrina came downstairs in a pale yellow dress, her wicker basket on her arm. "Off to the market, Mom," she said with her usual smile. I waited until the gate clicked shut, then wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and slipped outside. I kept a good distance, careful not to let her see me. She walked the familiar street, but instead of turning right toward the market, she veered left into a narrow lane lined with rusted fences and peeling paint. My pulse thudded. I ducked behind a row of bicycles as she knocked softly on a worn wooden door marked number 14. It creaked open, and she stepped inside. Minutes later, I returned home, breath ragged, and there she was in the kitchen in a different blouse, calmly chopping vegetables. Sleep was impossible that night. I kept seeing the yellow dress vanish into that alley, and the white blouse waiting for me in the kitchen. By morning, my decision was made. I tucked a family photo into my purse, the one with Grant, Sabrina, and little Theo smiling on the porch, and walked back toward number 14. The alley was quieter than before, sunlight barely reaching the cracked pavement. My knuckles trembled as I knocked. The door opened, and my breath left me. She stood there. Same height, same dark hair, same eyes as Sabrina, but her posture was different, nervous, shrinking. She gripped a rag in her hand, as if she were ready to slam the door. Before she could, another voice called from inside, firm but gentle. "Isla, you can't hide forever." A young woman stepped forward, Jenna Park, she later told me, a nursing student who rented the other room. She looked at me kindly and said, "Come in, Mrs. Calder. It's time you knew." Inside, the house was humble: concrete floor, patched walls, the faint smell of disinfectant. An older man lay coughing on a cot in the corner, covered by a frayed blanket. The woman who looked like Sabrina lowered her eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm not Sabrina. My name is Isla Hart." I sank into a wooden chair, gripping the photo in my hands. "Then why," I asked slowly, "have I seen you in my home?" Isla's voice broke. "Because she pays me. She told me to fill in, to watch Theo, to go to the market, to be her whenever she couldn't be. I didn't want to, but my parents need medicine, and the money was too much to refuse." My ledger suddenly had a face, a name, and a truth I wasn't prepared for. For a long moment I couldn't speak. Isla sat across from me, twisting the rag in her hands until her knuckles whitened. Finally, Jenna set a worn envelope on the table. "You should see this," she said. Inside were faded hospital papers, the kind nurses tuck away for safekeeping. The date of birth made my heart stutter. It was identical to Sabrina's, same hospital, same hour. Jenna explained quietly. "Years ago, a nurse discovered a struggling family with newborn twins. The parents, unable to provide for both, kept one and gave the other away. Isla had been raised by a kind but poor woman who worked long hours and took her in as her own." Isla lowered her eyes. "I never knew who my real family was. When I met Sabrina at the market, I thought it was chance. She said we looked like twins, joked about it. Then she offered me money to cover shifts in her life. She never mentioned we might actually be related." The room spun as I pieced the puzzle together, the handwriting changes, the mood swings, the sudden switches of clothes. It wasn't imagination. It was two sisters living one life. Then Jenna added the final shard. "One night I saw Sabrina at a cafe with a man named Victor Lang. I only caught it because they were laughing so close, calling each other honey." Micah's words echoed, seat 2A, leaning in like a couple. Now the motive was clear. Sabrina needed a double to keep her husband and son unsuspecting while she pursued another life, a richer one, with Victor, and she had used her own twin to do it. I left the house on trembling legs, but a strange calm carried me. The fog had lifted, the truth, as painful as it was, finally had shape. Isla wasn't an enemy. She was a sister caught in a cruel bargain, and my family, Grant and Theo, were the ones living under a shadow. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with my ledger open in front of me. For the first time, I didn't add an entry. Instead, I wrote a single line across the page: "It is time to bring light into the room." That evening, I called Micah. "Honey, bring me the boarding records from that Paris flight. I need them on the table." He hesitated, but my tone left no space for doubt. The next day, I moved through the house with quiet determination. I set the long oak table with our best white cloth, laid out candles, and cooked the dishes Theo loved: roasted fish, chili cornbread, sweet tea. It wasn't a celebration. It was a marker, a before and after. As I folded the napkins, I repeated one sentence under my breath, a promise as much as a shield. This is not about punishing Sabrina. This is about protecting a child. When the clock struck 7, every plate was in place. Grant would be home soon. Theo already bubbling with excitement for his favorite dinner. And waiting just outside, clutching her hands nervously, was Isla. That night she wouldn't play a part. She would stand as herself in the light. The house smelled of roasted fish and warm cornbread when Grant walked through the door. He looked surprised at the candles flickering on the table. "What's the occasion, Mom?" he asked, loosening his tie. I only smiled. "Sit, son. Tonight we need to talk as a family." Sabrina arrived a few minutes later in her pale blue dress, carrying her polished smile. She kissed Theo on the forehead and slid into her chair. For a moment everything looked normal until the knock at the door. When I opened it, Isla stepped in, hands clasped tight, face pale. Theo's eyes grew wide as saucers. He looked from Isla to Sabrina and whispered, "Why are there two moms?" My heart cracked, but I knelt beside him. "There aren't two moms, sweetheart. There are two sisters, and tonight we need to tell the truth." The room stilled. I opened my ledger, reading a few lines aloud: dates, times, changes too sharp to ignore. Then I set down Micah's boarding records with the Paris stamp bold on the page. Finally, Jenna stepped through the back door, her voice steady as she described seeing Sabrina with Victor Lang, calling him honey. I turned to Sabrina. "You owe us honesty. Correct the record or I will." Her composure faltered. She slammed her hand against the table. "Fine. Yes, I have someone else. Victor gives me the life I deserve. I'm tired of this house, this small life." Grant's face went gray. His jaw tightened as he whispered, "And Theo? Was he small too?" Theo's little voice broke the silence. "Grandma, did I do something bad?" I pulled him into my arms, tears spilling. "No, darling, you did nothing wrong. Grown-ups make choices. They are ours to fix." Sabrina shoved her chair back, fury flashing in her eyes. She glared at Isla, then stormed out without another word. The door shut softly, but the echo lingered like thunder. The truth was on the table now, undeniable, and though the room was heavy with grief, it was also finally free of shadows. The days after that dinner felt like walking through ruins. Grant moved in silence, papers from the divorce filling his desk. Sabrina never looked back. She signed her name, left the courthouse with Victor Lang, and closed the door on her family, as though it had never existed. Theo struggled most. Some nights he asked why his mom didn't come sing. But slowly another voice filled the gap. Isla began stopping by, not as a stand-in but as herself. She sat cross-legged on the floor drawing birds with Theo, her laugh gentle, her patience steady. He began calling her Auntie Isla and later simply Mom without hesitation. One afternoon I stood on the porch watching Grant kneel in the garden beside Isla, showing her how to tie tomato vines. Theo darted between them, carefree again. The ache in my chest eased. A wound was healing, not erased but carried with grace. Months later, under strings of backyard lights, Grant slid a ring onto Isla's hand. Theo stood proud as best man in a too-big jacket. Tears blurred my vision, but they were tears of hope. To anyone listening, keep a ledger when your world feels uncertain. Write dates, verbs, details. It will anchor you. Ask the hard question before silence does more harm, and always protect the child first. If this story touched you, tap like so others might find it. Share where you're listening from. I love reading every note. And if you've kept your own ledger, tell us one truth it gave back to you.
When the plane touched down and the seatbelt sign blinked off, Margaret Andrews smiled softly to herself. She had been looking forward to this visit for weeks, finally seeing her only son, David, after nearly a year apart. She imagined him waiting just outside the terminal, arms open, maybe even holding one of those silly signs with her name on it. But when